We saw some troubling things last time, didn't we?
I want to know my fate with the Nazgul.
Be careful what you ask for, Ranger. With prophecy comes torment.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Eric from TechBear here to bring you the Shadow of War review. If you haven't played Shadow of Mordor yet and are a fan of the Lord of the Rings mythos, I highly suggest playing the first game. You can find it on Steam and on PS4 and Xbox One for around $20 these days, and I will include links to that game in the description. Shadow of War and the former Shadow of Mordor star Talion, a former ranger whose family has been slain by the Dark Lord. Shadow of Mordor has refused with the Wraith, Celebrimbor, to exact revenge on Sauron and his jolly gang of orcs. Shadow of War picks up after the events of Shadow of Mordor and places Talion in possession of a ring of power, with which Celebrimbor wishes to use against the forces of evil. Shortly thereafter, Shelob, Queen of the Spiders, reveals she has a vision of Sauron and wishes for you to put a stop to it, but not before becoming sexy Shelob and stealing the ring from you, thus thrusting Talion into action to re-obtain the ring and ushering you, the player, into another adventure in Mordor. First up is the graphics. I found that the game ran very well throughout my entire playthrough, and it stayed at a constant 60 frames per second on PC with a few drops here and there, though I didn't find the drops to be too intrusive, and they'd never drop below 56 frames. The vistas in the game world look great, with improved textures and grand locations to fill it all out. The world looks great. Character models were filled out nicely, from the prickly beard of Talion to the gray worn down skin of Gollum. There's a lot to like here. I also found that the orcs in the Nemesis system to look quite diverse, taking an already impressive divisive nature of the first game and expanding on it exponentially. Moving on to the sound design, I did find the game to sound quite well, whether it be the clangs of axes and swords to the booms of the exploding firebombs, and everything sounds really great. The voice acting, especially so with the orcs, is awesome, and up to par, if not surpassing his predecessor. I don't have too much more to add here, as I'm not really an audiophile, but I do think that this is an improvement over the first game in many regards. Moving on to the gameplay, I found it to be a very solid experience. The combat system from Shadow of Mordor is back, seeing you execute all sorts of badassery against the hordes of orcs that you will encounter. The combat is very akin to the Arkham series, in which you can deflect enemy attacks and counter, while also giving you the ability to execute a charged attack, instantly dispatching your average foe. My favorite aspect of the gameplay is working the Nemesis system, which sees the player capturing orcs and using them to create armies for the player to overthrow the forces of Sauron. Some of the real fruits of your labor will be seen during the siege sections, in which you and your army of brainwashed captains attempt to sack a fortification, eventually having to enter the keep and face off with the leaders themselves. The Nemesis system throws a much more diverse cast of generated orcs at you, ranging from cave troll-like foes to the more standard wiry archer. Each orc captain or warlord has their own identity, and it really shows here in Shadow of War. Now, the rune system from the first game has been revamped as well. Instead of just equipping runes, as you did before, Talion will obtain the runes that change the look of his equipment. While the system isn't hugely different, it does make room for a sort of loot system, with rarities ranging from white commons to orange legendaries. Shadow of War is much bigger than Shadow of Mordor, and it really shows here. On to the nitty-gritty and the negatives. Now, bigger isn't always better here. I found some of the elemental effects were just not all that useful in the long run, even on the highest difficulty. Also, some of the abilities you unlock can seem trivial at best and not really worth using. Another disappointment was actually due to the combat system, where the game likes to pit you against so many enemies at once, making targeting a specific orc somewhat of a chore. Also, the inclusion of microtransactions here was surprising. For a game heavily based on single-player environments, this seems really forced and wedged in by Warner Bros. I really wish that Monolith had not added this into the game, because it's just another tale of a company trying to nickel and dime us, the consumer. In conclusion, I greatly enjoyed my time here in Mordor. Running around and beheading orcs left and right was awesome, and many times the game feels like a mixtape with all of the coolest sections of Lord of the Rings added in. I would say if you're a fan of Shadow of Mordor, this is a must-buy, as the game does just about everything from the first game better. If this is your first romp through the fields and mountains of Middle-earth, Shadow of War will not disappoint. That's why this game receives the TechBear seal of recommendation.